And so really the only thing that's necessary for it to start to flow, right, is for you to stop believing your good ideas. It's as simple as that. What's happening is happening on purpose. That's what predestination means, right? And so if it's happening on purpose and you're sitting here and you're in a process in which you're questioning who you're being in your life and you're questioning the way you're... See, it's not a question, it's not a matter of changing what you think. That's the personality's way, right? It's a matter of changing the way you relate to thinking. That's the path, you see. And so the process is one in which there's a natural process occurring in the sense that as long as you identified with being a personality and only that, and believing that's true, right? And as long as you identify with your understanding, your conditioned understanding of what's reality and what the world is, right? As long as that stuff is there playing, right? You will suffer because of its limitations and because of the fact that when you think you are only what you are being in this time-space reality, right? That you're suffering because it's like straitjacketing your awareness. It's straitjacketing your awareness. And that's why the suffering is occurring, right? So if I'm working with somebody, whether it's psychotherapy or this process, the same thing really, right? All I'm doing is looking to see what they're resisting. What are you resisting? And the process of coming out of the understanding or belief or whatever it is that you have it that you are, the process of coming out of that is a process of stopping resisting what's happening. It's as simple as that. Stopping resisting what's happening. You've been programmed to resist. You've been programmed to think that you are the source. You've been programmed to think that you're the doer. You've been programmed to think that, that you are really separate from everybody and from reality, right? But even if you just look at the science, right? You're right now, if it wasn't for the atmosphere you're in, you'd die immediately, right? So how separate are you, right? If you stop eating, you'll die. How separate are you from the food that's available? How separate are you from the oxygen in the room, right? How separate are you from all of these millions of interactions that are going on in your physiology all the time that require interdependence with the environment that you exist in? In other words, the truth, the scientific truth, is you may think that there is a reality that's separate from your hand if you hold it up. That's an illusion. Non-dual reality is if you hold your hand up, what looks like your hand and what's not your hand are the same thing. That's non-dual reality. That's interdependence. That's the way it really is. And if you understand that, you understand that it is obnoxious to think of yourself as separate from everybody else and everybody and reality itself. That's playing God. That's playing God. And if you do think that, and you were conditioned to think that, so it's not your fault, right? You've been programmed, right? But when that program's running and you're in that program when it's running, right? You're resisting the way it is. If you think you're separate from reality, you're resisting the way it is because that's not true, right? If you're resisting other people because you think that they're different than you, right? You suffer because that's not true. They're not different from you. They are you. They are you. But your conditioning has had you become so delusional, so unconnected to the truth, right? That you have to suffer your way back. You have to suffer your way back. And you have to suffer the consequences of continuing to do what you think you can do that will work, even after you hear about this. Even after you hear about this, there will still be situations you find yourself in where the thinking will run. You'll identify with the thinking. You'll use the thinking to do what you think is the right thing to do, and it'll fail, and then you'll be upset again. And then you'll blame the world or the other people, right? That's the process that continues to go on over and over and over again. It's a cycle. It's a cycle. That's why, if you look at what's going on in the world now, it's not new. It's a cycle. It's a pattern. War is not new. It's happened many, many times, right? The way human beings are behaving toward one another is not new. It's happened many, many times. You know, right now, people look at the news and they say, oh, it's horrible, the shootings, the mass. That's nothing compared to what went on around here in the past. Nothing. You know, people think that Hitler was bad, right? You go back a little further in time, right? And look at the history, the recorded history of what people did. What's going on now is nothing. What's going on now, this is a much safer world to live in now than it ever was, right? But we don't have any perspective about that. No, we just look at it in terms of, oh my God, right? Because we're drama queens and kings, right? You know, and we have our job be to be critical, look at the news, evaluate everything, complain about everything, resist everything, struggle with everything, be right about everything, and then on top of all that, expect to have life work. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. That's what I mean when I say human beings in the condition they're in are unable to act in their own best interest. Detriment. People are a detriment. You're a detriment. Even in relation, you know, recently what's occurred for me is that my physical transformation has been on the table. And in the past, I looked at that like, oh, I don't have to deal with that. You know what I mean? I'm spiritual. I don't have to deal with that. Well, suddenly it occurred to me, that's ridiculous. That's stupidity, right? Because the body and the spirit are the same thing. If you're acting as if one's different from the other, that's still ignorance, right? So at some point in the process, if you're in the process, at some point in the process, your body's got to come online. Your body's got to come online. The way a lot of spiritual teachers talk about that is they say embodiment, yeah? Most people are not embodied. Most people are in-headed, not embodied, right? And so as you participate in these teachings and practices, at some point, the fact that your body's asking for your attention will either get heard or you'll die. At some point, the fact that your body's asking for your attention will either get heard or you will die. How does it ask for your attention? It's asking for your attention every time there's pain, every time there is a lack of functionality in the body, constipation, migraines, right? Tightness in the chest, tightness in the neck, back pain, back problems, joint problems, right? All of those things that people go to the doctor, fix this thing, right? No responsibility for the body, right? They'll continue to abuse it, continue to overeat, continue, you know, to live in your head, continue to worry, continue to live a fear-based, anxious life, right? Continue not to exercise the body, continue to treat it like a stranger, and then expect it to love you. It's not going to happen. So at some point, that's going to come up, you know. But you don't have to listen to what I'm saying like, oh, I better right away get a program. That's not going to work. That's not going to work because you're trying to control the situation. No. Even when it comes to addiction, like cigarettes, alcohol, food, television, sex, sleep, you name it. Anything is capable of addiction. You can be addicted to anything, like you're addicted to thinking. You can be addicted to anything, right? But even when it comes to addiction, the only real way out of it, right, is to focus your attention on the heart of the matter, which is you, which is the realization of your true nature, right, and pursue the realization of that. If you do that, all of these symptoms will disappear because the reason they're here is because of the fact that you are tied up in pursuing being something you're not. It's as simple as that. And if you do pursue it, along the way, at the right time for you, it will be time for your body to be recognized and be responsible for it. You'll just wake up and realize, oh my God, that's the way it occurs. You'll wake up and it's like, oh my God, what have I been doing? How could I continue to do this? That's dealing with the physical body, but it's the same thing when you practice meditation. If you practice meditation, at some point that same kind of realization will occur. Oh my God, what was I thinking? You know, who was I being? How did I not realize this? It's a natural process, right? And you're in it. You're in that process. Everybody's in that process. There is no other process. Everybody's in that process. You're in it. However, you're fortunate because your process that you're in is a process that's a lot closer to the awakening experience than the average bear. Now, the question is, can you be responsible for that? You know, can you accept that the blessing you have been given, right, is a blessing to come to lunch, but it's not free lunch. The blessing you've been giving is a blessing to come to lunch, but it's not free lunch. The blessing you've been given is an invitation, but you have to show up for it, right? Or as my friend Paul Hederman says, the blessing or the grace you've been given is you've been, how does he say it? You've been served. You've been served. What do they call that stuff that they serve you in court?
In what? Oh, a summons?
Yeah, you've been served. It's not so much it wasn't, I forget exactly how, but well, you've been served with the opportunity to wake up. You know, you've been served the opportunity. But that's the thing about this, that what's built into the process, what's built into the predetermined process, is you ignoring the opportunity for a while. And then you're taking the opportunity, but half-ass for a while. Because you really don't want to give all the shit up you like. You know, you really don't want to give all the shit up that you enjoy doing, even though it's destructive and even though it's hurting you physically and emotionally, right? But the thing that you have to understand and realize is that you don't have to give anything up. You don't have to give anything up. You can keep it all. You can do whatever you want to do, right? You don't have to give any. All you have to do is focus your attention on the truth, on the reality of what you are. And as you do that, and as you let that take you, whatever's not working will clear up in a process of life itself. That's the way this works, right? When you start tuning in to the truth, right? What is not working clears up in the process of life itself. Why? Because you're there to notice now. Before, you weren't there to notice. You were talking bullshit, you know, you were believing nonsense, you were distracting yourself, you were believing all this superficial horseshit that people live their life by. But now, through the practice of meditation, you start to wake up, and when you start to wake up, you see for yourself very clearly how you're putting your foot in your mouth when you do it. And it gets very hard to do, very hard to do. There's two ways that never lie about where you are. It's actually one way, right? And that's what I look at. If I want to see where a person's at in this process, all I have to do to look at is to look at their actions. Look at their actions. What's the source of their actions, right? Now, speaking is an act, isn't it? Yeah, speaking is an act, right? That's why in here, when people speak, I turn it back to them and ask them to look at what they just said. Because your speaking is showing where you're at. Especially when your speaking is speaking that begins with I think, I feel, I understand, I want, I'm doing. That's all illusory speaking, right? Because you're being the illusion when you talk like that. So when you talk like that, I know right away what's going on. I know who's talking when you talk like that. And if I wanted to know more about you, all I'd have to do is follow you around. Because your actions tell the truth, don't they? They never lie. Your actions never lie. You can talk shit, but your actions are always honest, right? And that's one of the biggest things about this process that people don't like, is they don't like the idea that if I wake up and start paying attention to what I'm doing and what I'm saying, obviously I'm suffering. When I look at that, I can see clearly why I'm suffering, right? So that's the challenge of doing this work. It takes some audacity. You know, it takes a willingness to give up. Give up thinking that you've got the answers, that you can never get any answers. That's why, you know, addiction programming like AA works, simply because if you look at the heart of the matter, the only thing that needs to be in place for AA to work is surrender to a higher power. If that's not there, they tell you you're not in AA. You're not doing AA. Surrender to a higher power. In fact, you don't have to do AA if you surrender to a higher power, right? But AA is a community that's organized around that ideas, right? And then once that is in play, once you're giving up your good ideas and you're surrendering to a higher power, then you can do the emotional shadow work that is the 12 steps. That's the 12 steps, emotional shadow work. So it's very important to understand. I wanted to talk about this the other day, and I didn't go as far as I wanted to about it, because it really was something that when I got this, it was something that Peter Coyote said to me when we were talking about this business of giving up the myth that enlightenment or awakening means that you're going to get into that way of experience and just that's the way you're going to experience everything from now on. That's a myth. That's not true. You will always have to come back to this same body, and you will always have to come back to the same personality and the same conditioning, right? And work with that. You'll always have to come back. You can't live your life outside of that. Even when we talk about the default system, right? The default network, right? That's spoken of by Richie Davidson and his group, and I've spoken of it here as a negative thing, right? Mind wandering, it's a negative thing, right? Well, it's spoken of as a negative thing in the context of our current life and our current reality, right? Because in this current life and reality, it is a negative thing that just burns up energy and doesn't really have any purpose, right? But you are going to have to spend the life in which you're functioning in the world in that state, You're going to have to use that process of thinking, right, to get along in the world, right? And you're going to have to start to sort out the thinking in terms of what's the working mind and the thinking mind. And you're going to have to start paying attention so you know when you're wasting your energy, right? But this default state, we talk about the fact that what is the purpose of the programming in the mind and the brain is survival, right? And the default state is also connected to survival in the sense that if you turn the clock back to when you and I were wandering around in the woods, right? You better have a default network, because you better be able to think about you as this body surviving. Because back then, that was what you dealt with that was your main core every day. Surviving that day, not getting eaten that day, right? So that was what the default state was about. It was a time when to spend a lot of time thinking about what happened and what's going to happen and what's happening now, and I'm this body, right? That was very important. That was survival. If you couldn't do that, in fact, the fact that human beings could do that is what had us end up where we are now in terms of the evolutionary process, right? We're survivors, aren't we? Yeah, we're the survivors, right? Because of the default state. But here's the thing that's interesting. As time has passed and we have learned to use the default state and think and use thinking to create technology and all the rest of it, right? Nothing wrong with any of that. But the problem is that as time passed, the threat to our physical existence stopped being so severe, right? Right now, you didn't get up this morning worried about whether you'll live to see the sunset. You didn't do that. Right? Because we have enough as a society, we learned how to protect ourselves and create an environment, right, that is safe for us to live our lives, right? In fact, we've gone so far with that now that it's absurd. We are so thoroughly protected now that we have enough weapons to blow everybody up to protect ourselves, right? So it's really gone off the board, right? But what's happened over time is that the need to use that default state to survive every day isn't there anymore. And then what happened gradually as time passed, instead of identifying ourselves as a physical body, right, the default state started to expand. No, now I have to survive not just physically, I have to survive psychologically. So now the survival is not just survival of the physical body, it's the survival of my psychological identity. And so then the default state becomes a whole different thing, right? Now it's an obsession. It's an obsession with the survival of something that doesn't even actually exist. And we don't even know that. We're acting as if we're still in the jungle, aren't we? Yeah. So this process that we're in is a process of catching up to where things are right now, so that we can enjoy the fact that we are safe and use the fact that we are safe to do work to get beyond the experience we we're having of ourselves as just being physical and just being a psychological identity. And that's what offers the possibility of being awake. And that possibility of being awake offers us the opportunity to live in real time. Real time is the present moment, right? It's the only real time. Offers us the possibility of living in real time, spending our life in real time, which is the ever-present moment, right? And if we're spending our life living in that ever-present moment completely, right, then there is no death, because death requires time, doesn't it? Yeah. So if you're actually living in the present moment, you're experiencing being in the present moment, what's going to happen is not relevant anymore. What's going to happen is not relevant. You're totally preoccupied and totally enjoying and totally connected to and totally excited by and totally experiencing what's happening now as the reality that is the only reality. So that death isn't a problem because you don't think about the future anymore, and it's not a problem in the present. It can't be a problem in the present. Even if you're going to die tonight, it can't be a problem in the present. So that's kind of the gateless gate. That's the way out. That's the way out of this conceptualized hell. It's a conceptualized hell. So we're afraid of leaving the conceptualized hell to experience the unknown. I'd be in a hurry, if I were you, to leave the conceptualized hell to experience the unknown. It can't be worse than this. It can't be worse than this. And the only thing about it that makes it conceptualized hell is the fact that you're living in a thinking process instead of being in life, instead of living life. If you live life, and if you live life without this judging and evaluating and resisting, right? And without this egotistical conceptual understanding and identity that has you believe you're God, that's what it amounts to, right? If you live your life without that and you just be with life the way life is, and instead of judging it and thinking it should be different. And what I mean by that is thinking that when you're upset, you shouldn't be upset. As you get old, you shouldn't be getting old. You know, or when you're angry, you shouldn't be angry. When there's war in the world, there shouldn't be war in the world, right? As long as you stay in opposition to the whole thing, right, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. As soon as you let go and allow it all to be the way it is and allow you to be the way you are, what's the struggle? Where's the struggle? It's called flowing. It's flow. It's flow. When you're moving with life at the speed of life, right? Life isn't going fast and you're not going fast. Life isn't going fast and you're not going slow. You're going at the same speed as life, right? And it's like Einstein said, right? In the theory of relativity, right? If you're traveling at the same speed as light, there's no time. If you're living at the same speed of life, there's no time. If you're living with life the way life is, there's no problem. How could there be a problem? In order for there to be a problem, you have to separate yourself from life, figure it out, evaluate it and judge it, and then conclude that it's not what it should be. That's insane. Why? Well, the reason why is because we're stuck in an out-of-date system. The operating system that we're stuck in is an out-of-date system. We're stuck in a system that worked when we were living in an environment that our physical survival was in danger at all times, right? Now we're not, but we live as if we are. And so we can never enjoy that we're not, because we're feeling threatened all the time. And we're feeling threatened by things that aren't really a threat, right? Because we have it that who we are is able to be threatened, that who we are is vulnerable to life, that who we are is vulnerable to the experiences or to the processes that occur in a human life. And that's true if your identity is a physical body, and that's true if your identity is a psychological identity, right? But that if you come to recognize the reality within which that exists, right? But that the reality within which that exists is the truth, not that separate from that reality, then the whole idea of there being a problem disappears. What problem? How can there be a problem? How can there be a problem? It's like people say who are speaking from an enlightened perspective about situations they're dealing with. I don't have any problems. All I have is situations. A situation becomes a problem when you start to think about it in a certain way, doesn't it? Yeah. And a problem for one person could be a solution for another person. So are problems actual, or are they a function of the way you're relating to what's going on? Let me say that again, because this is really key to what we're doing here. Are problems actual? Do they actually exist? Or are problems a function of the way we're relating to what's going on? If you pay attention and if you look with earnest and if you look to see what's so, you'll see it's obviously a function of the way we're relating to what's going on. It must be, because there are people who aren't relating to what's going on the way we are, and they're fine. There aren't many of them yet. Hopefully there'll be more. But the possibility for you to be one of them is available at all times. And it can happen immediately because it's already true. It can happen immediately because it's already true. Or it can take time because you're dug in or you're identified with the personality. And if you're identified with the personality, then it's hard for you to know the difference between what it wants and what you want. Yeah, you think what you want, what it wants, right? But all it ever wants is the same, right? To get more of what feels good and less of what doesn't. That's it, right? Which is infantile. That's infantile. There's no maturity to that. There's no sophistication. There's no wisdom in any of that. That's separating yourself from the reality of life, separating yourself from the reality of who you are. So, where you find yourself is you've been conditioned and you've ended up the way you are. You've ended up identifying with the body and identifying with the personality, and that is what runs. That's running. It's running. It's running all the time, right? And one of the things a personality will do to try and preserve its existence is to trick you into think that it's not running, right? To trick you into think that, now I know what's going on. I can pay attention now. I can watch the situations that I find myself in, and now I can function, efficiently in my life. That's the personality strategizing, trying to use these teachings as a strategy to live your life more effectively. And the interesting thing about that is it works. It works. I mean, if you do what works, it works, whether you're awake or asleep, right? So the personality will do what works and then say, you see, I am the real deal because I did this and it worked. It's how it constantly tries to validate and verify itself. And when that doesn't happen, something's wrong with the world. It's not me. It's not me. I'm doing what works. I don't understand what the problem is here. So that's the darkness that we start this process in. And the only thing you have to do to come out of that darkness is recognize the light. If you open in a completely black, dark room, right? If you open a window and the sun is outside, how long does it take for the room to light up? Yeah. That's the availability of the reality of yourself. Is that if those windows or that door opened up, right? It takes no time for the light to light the room. It takes no time for you to be what you are. It takes time for you to continue to resist it. And that's what this process is, by the way. This process is not see, the personality will have you believe this process is going somewhere positive and you're accomplishing something and you're getting somewhere, right? But that's not what this process is. This process is being aware as you can of what you're doing to resist and stop the process and eliminate the possibility. That's what you'll do on your own. That's what runs automatically, right? So this process is to be aware of that running, right? And disengage yourself from involvement with that operation. It's like, when you're driving a car, right, that in the old days when you used to have to shift the gears, remember, for us old folks, you have to shift the gears. And in order to shift the gears, you had to push the clutch in. And when you push the clutch in, it disengages, right, the drive shaft from the gears, right? Now, so the gears keep running, right? But they're not engaged now, so they're not going anywhere, right? This is the same process that we're using in meditation. To disengage yourself from the insanity that your mind keeps running, it'll keep running, but you're not engaged. So because you're not engaged, it won't take you anywhere, and it won't take you to suffering. That's the process that we're in. So when you're practicing meditation, you're practicing disengaging the clutch, disengaging from the gears, disengaging from the mind, disengaging from the thought process, right? And that the gears will still run, right? Right? But it's not going to go anywhere now because you're not following it. You're not relating to it like that's you anymore. And you're practicing doing that in meditation when you move your attention over to the awareness. When you're in the meditative state in awareness, it's like the clutch is in. The mind may still be running, but you're not there for that. You're no longer the audience for it. You know, and as my friend Muji always said that, you know, the thoughts are always auditioning for your attention, right? But if there's no audience, the show's over. And when you move your attention out of the thinking activity over to the stillness of awareness, the show's over. There's no audience. And if there's no audience, the thoughts will die down and stop because there's nobody to engage with anymore. There's nothing to engage with. You could even say, you know, it's like, did the tree fall in the forest type thing if nobody heard it, right? You could even say that if you're not attending to thoughts, do thoughts still exist? Well, the answer is we don't know, but for practical purposes they don't, because they don't exist for me. I'm not aware of them, right? And that's all we need to know in order to do the work, right? But that's not to make thinking bad or to think that to spend time away from thinking is the answer. No. The answer when we spend time away from thinking is to get reoriented to our true nature and then go back to thinking. Because you got to be in the thinking mode to be in the world. Yeah, so, but now if you're awake and thinking is occurring, right, the thoughts will now start to shape themselves to the reality of what you are, right, and become more realistic. But before that, they were shaping themselves to the illusion of what you were and didn't produce anything but survival. Survival to what end? Survival for a miserable person. Yeah, so you can survive. And if that becomes too much, if it becomes too evident that your life is a failure and that life is a failure, see, that's part of the process. In order for this process that you're in to really work and come to a conclusion, you've got to be absolutely clear about the fact that life as it was being lived is a failure. And to conclude that that's a failure is a very important, a necessary step in order to move on. If you still believe that carrying on your life the way you used to do it still works, you'll be caught in the middle. You know, you'll be trying to play that way and this way too, and it'll be worse than it ever was, worse than it ever was. So you have to come to see that this idea of recognizing that life as it was being lived by you is a failure doesn't mean life's a failure. It means life as it was being lived by you is a failure. And that brings us to this. That brings us to the possibility. But if you can't recognize the possibility and life as it was lived is seen to be a failure, suicide. That's all that's left, right? Suicide. So suicide is a failed understanding. Suicide is a failed understanding of the fact that because your life is a failure, that doesn't mean that it's hopeless and you should kill yourself. It means that you should look for another possibility. And if you look for another possibility, you'll find other possibilities. That's what this is. That's what these teachings are. The other possibility. And when you find the other possibility, then the fact that life was a failure takes on meaning because that's what it took for you to wake up and realize the possibility. It's a workable reality, right? But if it's your destiny not to be able to see beyond the failure, then it's your destiny to kill yourself. Or to kill the body. You can't kill yourself. That's one of the things about suicide that makes it such a tragedy, is that it's a mistake. Nobody ever succeeds at suicide because you can't kill who you really are. You're just killing the body. You're just ending the game. You're ending the possibility in this life to realize what's possible is what you're doing, but you can't kill yourself. If you want to have a successful suicide, kill yourself. Kill the self you thought you were and stay in this life. That's a good suicide. That's a healthy suicide. I highly recommend that suicide. It's what people say when they say, I want to die before the body. I want to die now. I don't want to wait for death. I don't want to wait for death. I want this, who I think I am, to die now so I could be who I am. I want this, who I think I am, to die as soon as possible so I could stop suffering under the illusion that that's what I am. And that can happen. It's a real possibility, right? But the trick about it is that as you proceed toward the realization of the truth of yourself, you will have to deal with the fact that the process gets uncomfortable. And when it gets uncomfortable, the personality will show up and say, this can't be right. This can't be right. You didn't buy a ticket to this shit, right? This can't be right. Something must be wrong here, you know? Something must be wrong. What?
It's too hard.
It's too hard, yeah. I'll have to find some other way. Let me try heroin. That's the way it goes for people. It's too hard. Too hard for who? Too hard for who? For who you really are. For who you really are, nothing that can occur in a human life is not only not too hard, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing at all. Because for it to be something, right, it has to be something that has an impact on you, right? For it to be something, for it to be hard, it has to be something that has an impact on you, right? But when you're experiencing what you are as awareness itself, like space, there's no impact. There's no impact. The experiences come, and when you experience the experiences go. That's all. Come and go. Change. Nothing's ever fixed. Nothing ever stops. Nothing ever stops. You don't have to worry about anything staying the same. Nothing ever stays the same, including you, right? So that's what's available. And you know, part of my job here is to keep the carrot in front of you, right? And your job here is to keep chasing the carrot, right? Knowing that the idea of the carrot and chasing the carrot is just a process that you're in. It's not going anywhere. It's a process that's necessary for you to end up where you already are. That's the process. That's why at any point in time, whatever's going on with you is exactly what has to be going on with you in your particular process. And when you accept that, when you allow that, right, it changes. As soon as you allow that, it changes. And now you're in the next level of the thing. And then you experience that. And in the next level of it, right? See, it's kind of like when you get to the top of the space you're in, the mental space you're in, or the evolutionary space you're in, when you get to the top of it, it's like you can't take it anymore, you know what I mean? It's like your head's gonna blow up, right? And then all of a sudden you're in a new space. All of a sudden you're in a new space, in this huge new space, and everything feels so good, so easy, right? And then as time passes, that new space starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until you're back in, I can't take this anymore. Why is this like this, right? It's like that. You see, it's interesting that we get so confused about it and we think that we don't understand what's going on when the evidence for how things work is around us all over the place, right? If you look at reality, the way reality is, can you not see that reality is doing this? The universe is doing this. Your lungs are doing this. Your heart is doing this, isn't it? Yeah, expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction, right? And when it's in the contracted state, oh, it's terrible, terrible. And when it's in the expanded state, oh, it's wonderful, it's wonderful. And it's back and forth, right? So, as James Taylor said, if you wake up, you start enjoying this ride. It's like a roller coaster ride. You start enjoying this ride, in and out, up and down, back and forth. Die, live, wake up, sleep, right? It's all back and forth, back and forth. And so when you wake up and you become the awareness, right, then you are no longer affected by the contraction and expansion anymore, right? You start riding the horse in the direction it's already going. You start experiencing the excitement and the value and the meaning and the love and the peace of this whole process of going back and forth, right? Instead of resisting it when it's not the way you want it and trying to hold on to it when it's the way you want it. That's the suffering. The suffering is between the contraction and the expansion, right? You want it to stay the way you want it. I felt good when it was expanded. I liked it. I liked it. I want my whole life to be that way. I never want it to be any other way. And then it contracted. And then it contracted. And then, oh, what happened? Why is my life this way? It must be because of you. I'll get a divorce. That's what happens. Or it must be because of me. I'll kill myself. Or it must be because of people in general. I'll get a rifle and get on top of a building and shoot some of them. See, it's very easy when shit like that happens, you know, to take their self-righteous position and say, oh, we should kill that kid. We should kill that kid, right? That kid is you. That kid is you. You know, you are the shooter and you are the murdered, all wrapped up in one, right? You're murdering life every day. You're murdering life every day by not being yourself, right? And of course, we project that onto the shooter, you know, so that we don't have to carry the responsibility for who we are, right? But the fact of the matter is, if people took the time to look close, right, and ask the right questions, you know, how did this kid end up like that? What happened to him that he ended up in a position where he was willing to give up his life? You know, right now, they say, oh, they put his picture on the news, right? And he's talking, he's telling everything, right? You know why? Because this is exactly what he wanted to happen. This isn't a problem for him. The only recognition he could ever experience in life is by doing what he did. The only recognition he could experience. And now everybody's looking at me. Now you wouldn't give me any attention? Now try not to give me any attention. You see? That's what's really going on. If you really see what's going on, you feel sad. You don't feel mad. You feel sad. Because his actions and the actions of any human being that's killing and destroying life are your actions. And until you can take responsibility for the whole thing, right, you're separate from it and you can't experience the good stuff because you're not willing to take responsibility for the bad stuff.
You said, I'm not culpable. I'm not culpable. I said it's not my fault.
Well, if you wake up in this life, one of the things you'll wake up to is it's not a matter of whose fault it is. It's a matter of taking responsibility for it. It's a matter of understanding that if you stop thinking you're the source and you allow the source to be the source, right, then you can take responsibility for the whole thing. Yeah, well, I mean, you know, until you come out of the position of being a personality, you can't see the forest from the trees. You can't see what's going on. What you see is what you believe is true, and it will just continue to take you to hell. That's the way it works. So, let's get out of here.